Welcome to today's webinar. Today we'll be talking about a very interesting topic on mobile threat defense. Our speakers for today will be Interware's solution consultant Troy Lawrence and JT Keating, the SVP Strategic Initiatives of the global leader in mobile threat defense, Zimperium. Please feel free to type in your questions in the chat box and we will address them at the end of the session. So now, please welcome Troy.
Thank you, Camille. Hi, everyone. Thank you for attending this month's webinar. My name is Troy Lawrence, and I'm with Interware Systems. For those of you who are not familiar with Interware, we are your one-stop shop for everything cybersecurity, whether your issues require InfoSec policy generation and management, awareness training for staff, cybersecurity assessments, or simply hardware and software solutions. We help our clients digitally transform their businesses to increase efficiency, reduce cost, and drive growth, all without cutting corners on their cybersecurity. And our certified experts are skilled in multiple different on-prem and cloud-based infrastructure solutions to help with our clients' problems and pain points. As Camille said, our topic today is mobile devices and the security threats they pose. So I'm going to start with a couple statistics here from 2022. During the first quarter of 2022, mobile malware attacks increased by 500%. About 54% of working adults worldwide use their personal smartphones for business-related purposes. And 39% of organizations surveyed experienced a data security breach due to a lost or stolen device. Having a phone is essential in our modern world. They have rapidly integrated into our work life and are extremely beneficial in so many ways. However, as they have become more and more advanced, they are rapidly becoming one of the most overlooked security risks in the ever-changing threat landscape. Threats such as data leaks. There are multiple apps that will collect data from your phone and transmit that data to a remote server or servers without your knowledge. If these servers are left vulnerable or hacked, the information transmitted from your device could be stolen and used by criminals. This information can include, but is not limited to, your name, your date of birth, your bank account information, your contact lists, your location history, and photos. Some apps are even capable of using distribution code native to popular mobile OSs such as Android and iOS to move sensitive data across a corporate network without raising alarms. Another security risk is open Wi-Fi. Many people, when they're on the go, will stop in at a Starbucks or a McDonald's or a Tim Hortons to grab some food or something to drink. These places usually have free Wi-Fi that people will connect to get away from using their data. Unfortunately, these networks are not always secure, and they could allow for others to spy on your online activity. Some cybercriminals will even create fake Wi-Fi hotspots that will attempt to steal your data if you are to connect to them. As a best practice, you should never connect to a Wi-Fi that you're not familiar with or you don't trust. Of course, though, it's not that easy to avoid free Wi-Fi, and as such, you should always avoid accessing any services that require confidential or personal information when connected to them. The next security risk I think many people are very familiar with is phishing. And I think many people have heard about the Nigerian prince who wants some financial support to gain access to his wealth and is willing to compensate you should you help him. This is an example of phishing where a malicious actor poses as someone who needs immediate assistance. They emphasize their urgency and they want something from you, whether it is confidential or personal. Now, everyone would like to believe that they wouldn't fall for these kinds of attacks, but these attacks are becoming more and more sophisticated to the point where it can be difficult to tell the difference between a real email and a phishing attack. And with email being accessible from smartphones, it only widens the attack surface for criminals to try and exploit. And there are other types of phishing attacks that cybercriminals will use that are directed towards smartphones, like smishing or vishing. If you're unfamiliar with these terms, smishing is a form of phishing attack that comes to you in a text message. Often it's from an unknown phone number, and it demands payment or requires you to confirm sensitive information, or simply it's just a message that says click here with a hyperlink. On the other hand, phishing comes to you by a phone call. The caller will threaten you with consequences should you not comply. Many times they try and pose as a figure of authority, but they can also pose as legitimate businesses that need you to confirm details for services such as a delivery or making a payment. All three avenues that I just mentioned are accessible to a phone, and like I said, 2 of them are directed at phones. And this should already highlight how broad the attack surface can become when incorporating smartphones. Another security risk is spyware. I'm referring to apps that are used to monitor your family's activities and whereabouts. Many times, these are installed by significant others or coworkers or even employers, almost always with the best of intentions. However, due to the level of access that these apps require, they can gain an absurd amount of authorization and use it to access sensitive data. Some versions of spyware can even use a zero-click exploit to install themselves on your mobile device. And these are only some of the security risks that mobile phones pose to cybersecurity. And if these don't scare you, then let me give you a couple examples of when a mobile device was used to benefit cybercriminals. So in April of 2021, Park Mobile, a mobile app that was used that is used in the US for cashless parking, was breached, and 21 million users had their personal information leaked onto a crime forum, which included their date of birth, their emails, their phone numbers, their license plate numbers, and passwords. Moving forward, Activision, the company behind the Call of Duty franchise, was breached in December of 2022. It was caused when an Activision HR employee clicked on a hyperlink sent to them by a text. So it was a smishing attack. While Activision reported no sensitive employee data, game code, or player data was accessed, a security research group known as VX Underground said the infiltrators exfiltrated sensitive workplace documents as well as the content release schedule. And TikTok. I'm sure many people are familiar with the fact that the Canadian government banned TikTok not too long ago, shortly after the United States government did. And this was done because in 2022, TikTok was able to bypass Google and Apple security to gather more information from mobile devices that they were installed upon. And the last item that I have here is not so much an event, but it's more of an ongoing issue, which is Pegasus. If you're unfamiliar with it, Pegasus is spyware that was developed by the Israeli cyber arms company known as the NSO Group that can secretly be installed on mobile devices running recent versions of iOS and Android using a zero-click exploit. It has the capability of reading text, tracking calls, collecting passwords, using location tracking, accessing microphones and cameras, and to gather information from apps on the device. Now, you might be thinking at this point, my company's got an MDM solution. We're safe from all this. I'm here to tell you that MDM is only a management tool. It is used to manage the devices and has very limited security features. Overall, mobile devices have become an integral part of our work and our lives. But by using them, we widen the attack surface that cybercriminals can use to attack us. Fortunately, our friends at Zimperium have developed a great solution, which JT is here today to talk to you about. JT, take it away.
Thank you, Troy. I've actually really enjoyed that. It's kind of. I mean, I guess I shouldn't say I enjoy when we're talking about devices being under attack and the like, but I mean, I enjoyed it because of just the way you were stepping through it. And I'm going to hit on a lot of the same points. I'm going to talk about spyware, talk about ransomware, I'm going to talk about MDMs. We're going to hit on all this fun stuff. So hopefully it'll be entertaining and potentially educational for folks on the call. So and given our technical issues, Troy has graciously volunteered or was voluntold to move my slides for me. So we're gonna run through that way. So Troy, if you wouldn't mind just advancing the slides, please. And how about we just go to the next one? There we go. So the topic of this conversation is, as you guys know, because you signed up for it, why MTD now, right? MTD is mobile threat defense. That's actually Gartner's term. IDC calls it mobile threat management. And I will, as I mentioned just a second ago, clearly categorize what's in MTD versus MDM, what Troy was just talking about. But ultimately, even Verizon in their mobile security index here in 2022, basically said mobile security is now critical, right? And the simple fact is they're not alone. So Troy, if you wouldn't mind going to the next highly busy slide, but people will probably like it in some way, shape, or form. Anyway, who says the time is now? Well, analysts, regulatory bodies, CISA, NIST, Health and Human Services, PwC. If you look at the chart on the left, that was an actual survey of CISOs around North America, and they basically were asking them, what vectors are you most worried about? What things do you think are going to change in 23 versus 22? And you can see that when you say, what percent of the threats via these pathways will impact significantly in 23 versus 22, number one answer on the board was mobile devices. So all of these experts are saying now is the time for mobile security. So if you wouldn't mind, Troy, for the next slide, the next logical question is why? So if we click once, and you can actually fill it out if you want, Troy, we can just hit all three. Why? Well, first of all, I'm old school. I've been around for a billion years, so I get to say stuff like this, right? When it comes to endpoint security, and really security of any kind, two things have to be there simultaneously in order for somebody to justify investing in protecting those endpoints. For instance, there has to be something of value on the endpoint, and then they have to actually be exposed to risk. If either of those two aren't happening, you don't have to worry about it as much, right? So is there anything of value on mobile devices? Answer, yes, absolutely yes. And I'm going to show you some data here on it in a little bit. On average, there's about 90 apps on most mobile devices that are accessing corporate data, whether it's BYOD or whether it's corporate owned, really doesn't matter. Ballpark is about 90. 10% of those at least are business productivity apps. We're talking Office 365, we're talking access to Salesforce, we're talking, whatever the case may be. And then, oh, by the way, they also are used by multi-factor authentication. So even if you're kind of sort of want to convince yourself that there's no enterprise data on the mobile devices, chances are you're using it for multi-factor authentication. So if that device is compromised in some way, shape, or form, all of that data or that access is now exposed and it's at risk. And so that's why Gartner and CISA and NIST and everybody are saying, you got to do something about this, right? Second part of the equation, are they at risk? Well, Troy just got finished giving you a little bit of a synopsis. I'm going to run through some stuff from our global mobile threat report to just kind of reinforce that. Simple answer, yes. These devices are in fact under attack. Since 60% of the endpoints accessing the enterprise are mobile, if you don't have protection on them and they're accessing all this data and they're housing MFA, then you basically have a risk exposure of half your endpoints. So clearly something that needs to be looked into, and that's why some of the largest and most security conscious organizations in the world have already embraced mobile threat defense, and why others are continuing to do it now. So Troy, if you wouldn't mind, next slide, please. This is the Gartner fine point of what Troy was talking about just a second ago. There is a difference between mobile threat defense and mobile device management. Mobile device management, as Troy said, is management. That's what it's there for. Mobile threat defense is the active detection of risks and threats. And there's a little baby overlap, like, do you have a PIN code set? The overlap is really around risk, not around attacks. There is zero attack detection capability in mobile device management solutions, period, full stop. So that's what it is. MTD, think of it this way, is the smoke detector. Quite often on managed devices, the MDM could be the sprinkler system. So an MTD solution and an MDM can work together where a threat is detected with MTD, and then MDM can take some actions on the device. Or there's other places where the MTD can be standalone and prevent other things from happening. But you see all these things on the side, vulnerability management, app vetting. We're going to get back to app vetting. Troy talked about TikTok and some of the capabilities of TikTok. So a major component of mobile threat defense, according to Gartner, IDC, Forrester, and I run the analyst relations for Zimperium, so I chat with all these guys, and they're really, really smart dudes. App vetting is a key part. I mentioned that on average, there's 90 apps on a typical device, of which 10% are business productivity apps. By definition, the other 90 are not. So if the other 90%, what risks do we have in them? Like in the TikTok example, the big concern with a lot of folks has been it's sending traffic to China. So they're like, okay, that's bad. Well, an MTD solution not only will be detecting malicious apps like some of the deliveries, not necessarily Pegasus, that's an exploit. They'll detect that too. But as far as malware like Flytrap or Phone Spy. Phone Spy is a malware we detected in South Korea that actually has all of the same capabilities as Pegasus, but it doesn't involve exploiting a 0-day like Pegasus did, right? So an MTD solution will detect a malicious app like Phone Spy, but it should also enable you to set app policies even around perfectly legitimate apps, and that's this app vetting piece. Again, not part of MDMs. And then you go down through all the different detections. So next slide, please, Troy. What risks are we actually facing? And this is going to be the speed dating version of threat data, okay? Generally speaking, there's 4 main categories of threats on mobile devices. We always just call it DNAP, device, network, apps, phishing, okay? Device. Exploiting the device, actually capitalizing on the device. And you think about mobile is different in 3 ways from traditional endpoints. I'll give you the first 2 that are just kind of, oh, that's kind of cool. And then I'll tell you the one that should terrify you. The first one is all apps are in buckets on mobile. They're in containers. So apps don't get to play with apps like they used to and still do on a lot of traditional operating systems. So that's good and bad when it comes from a security standpoint, mostly good. Then the kernel of the operating system is locked down. So traditional endpoint solutions, EDR, EPP, et cetera, do not work on mobile. They don't work on mobile because they're used to hooking the operating system. You can't do that on mobile. So a mobile threat defense solution, Zimperium is the worldwide leader. Troy mentioned that. Thank you for the pub. We have to be able to do machine learning based detection of known and unknown attacks on device without hooking the operating system. That is why mobile threat defense is not equivalent with EPP or EDR. They're 2 different things, solving the same problem on different endpoints, but two very different things. So A, all apps are in containers. B, the kernel of the operating system's locked down. The C is the one that terrifies most people. We all know that you talk to any security person and they'll tell you that the single biggest risk in an organization is and has always been a carbon-based life form. Human beings make really stupid decisions, really dumb decisions. Okay, now let's think about mobile for a minute. Okay, there is no central patch management system. It doesn't exist on mobile. The user is the admin of a mobile device. The user decides what apps to download. They decide what networks to connect to. They decide what patches to apply or not. And most of the time, they're not going to do it because it's going to slow down Angry Birds. So they're just going to leave it the way it was, right? So you basically take your biggest fear and now you make them the admin of the device, and they spend 80% plus of their time outside of the protected corporate network and then walk right back in. So it's like scary, right? So device exploits, et cetera, mobile phishing, mobile apps, and malicious networks. And those are the ones we're going to run through here real quick. Okay, next slide, Troy. So we hit on some of these already. Troy mentioned Pegasus, for instance. As I mentioned when I was talking about phone spy, which isn't on this list, the thing that's scary about things like phone spy that we've been noticing more and more and more is that they're now starting to be developed with open source code that is not directly attributed back to somebody like the NSO group. So it's now become free range. It's not just proprietary attacks. But we've seen all these. We talked about Twilio. Twilio was a smishing attack along the lines of what Troy was talking about. So you got this combination. You see all these headlines. It's kind of like, Troy. I don't know if has anybody ever talked to you about the FedEx logo? Have you ever seen that whole thing?
I don't think so. No.
Okay. Well, once I tell you what I'm about to tell you, and everyone can take a look at it. If you look at the FedEx logo, when somebody explains it to you, there's an arrow right in the middle of the FedEx logo. Once somebody explains it to you, you can never unsee it. It's like every time you see the FedEx logo now, you're like, oh, there's an arrow in there, right? That's what happens here with mobile security. Once you start like going, I'm going to start looking, you're going to see these headlines all over the place. So that's just a matter of course there. Next slide, please, Troy. So here's a whole bunch of numbers. I'm going to tell you the most important ones. Well, I mean, I guess they're all relatively important. We've been talking about them for some time. The 42% is important. This was actually respondents themselves coming back and saying, again, C-level executives, very similar to the PwC study, that almost half of them said that mobile devices and web apps have led to breaches in their organizations. So that's a pretty solid number, right? I mentioned the 10% of apps being productivity apps. The 466% is really interesting. That is the increase in actually exploited in the wild, 0-day vulnerabilities against mobile. The other thing I think is really interesting on that is in 2022, which is what this data is from, we're about to come out with the 23 analysis. So of course, this has been 21 data for the 22 report, et cetera, et cetera. 1/3 of all of the exploited in the wild 0-day exploits were iOS alone. So these things are clearly being targeted and a lot is at risk. And then our particular team discovered 5,000 new malware samples, brand new samples every day in 2021. And that will, and sneak like a little, the interware folks will be able to give you our threat report when it comes out again in April, little sneak peeks, which I'll sprinkle in here as we go. There was a 51% increase in the amount of malware that we detected in 22. So it matches very closely with the data that Troy was talking about just a few moments ago. So next slide, please. This is just across, and this was off of anonymized data of 70 million devices around the world. And you can see what percentage of the devices were actually encountering each one of these. The ones I think are newsworthy, I mean, the mobile malware, clearly, it's pops off. If you look at the man in the middle, that's a network attack, right? You talk about 13 or 14% of the devices were actively on, like actual bad guys controlled them, man in the middle attack solutions. And malicious website is kind of like, you're like, oh, it's an interesting one. Well, one of the main things that we want to talk a little bit about with you guys when we get to the solution is privacy. Not only are we the most enterprise capable, and that's what Gartner says, mobile threat defense solution on the planet, we also are the one that protects privacy the most. We do all of our detection, almost all of our detection on device, as opposed to in the cloud. So we don't actually have to take a bunch of data off that might be considered PII. We are so well known for our phishing detection that organizations like GigaOM have actually, they put us in their anti-phishing reports, not their mobile security reports. So we're literally the only mobile player that is basically known throughout the world for our anti-phishing technology. Troy was mentioning SMS, Messenger, email. By the way, fake QR codes. Down here in Dallas, there were some enterprising folks that started putting fake QR codes on the parking meters, and then everybody would come and they would pay their fines or pay their to get parked, Of course, their cars started getting towed, and that's how the guys got busted. So if they were smart, they would have actually let some of them go through. But at any rate, we don't actually read text messages. We don't read emails. We never look at the content. The only thing we do is if somebody actually clicks on the link, we will tell them, hey, this is a phishing link. You shouldn't go. This is suspicious. This malicious website, 12.5% of the people that were warned still went, which is mind-boggling to me. And then you go all the way down, and even though it looks like a small number, 5% of all the devices were actively compromised. They were compromised in some way, shape, or form. And this is above and beyond simple jailbreaks. A jailbreak is what a user does. Compromise what the bad guy does. So these are pretty interesting numbers. Pretty interesting numbers. Next slide, please, Troy. This is just a cool way that I won't spend any more time on. If you actually divide 2,034,217 by 52 weeks, or by 365 days, you end up with 5,000. So when I talked about 5,000 malware samples, this is just a cool way to show that. So I think we can cruise right past that, please. We talked about spyware. I've already talked a lot about this, but again, here's a bunch of these headlines. The part that I really emphasize from people is, and Troy mentioned, a lot of times these could be things that are put on by your employers or whatever the case may be. They're also ones that are being actively used by the attackers, right? And the fact that it's going towards more and more open source code, and you can't just, point at NSO or one of their compatriots and throw sanctions or something at them, makes it frightening because it just continues to go. And this literally is, if you think about it, down here in the States, CISA, the lady for Jen Easterly, who runs CISA, she talks about the fact that security is becoming a kitchen table discussion. Well, what device do you take to the kitchen table? I mean, I know we're all supposed to be perfect parents, and we're not supposed to tell our kids, don't bring the phones to the table. We have the basket by the door. I mean, I get that, but I never really see it happen very much. But it's our phones. Our phones are with us all the time. Our phones are in board meetings. Our phones are, so having cameras, microphones, getting contacts, there's a reason why this is spiking. And oh, by the way, because 60% of these endpoints don't have the same penetration of coverage yet from a security standpoint, again, they're in the hands of users. They don't have security like MTD initially. So when they go, I mean, they're perfect targets. Why would you not target them, right? And then there's the next one, if you wouldn't mind, Troy. This is where it starts getting more scary. We noticed a huge spike in legit mobile ransomware last year. Beforehand, because of apps and containers and all that stuff, there wasn't as much real ransomware. It was kind of fake. It would put a little screen up and it would scare you, but if you just turn the phone off and on, it was gone, right? We stopped 100,000 legit mobile ransomware attacks last year, like legit ransomware attacks. And there, three broad buckets. The usual one is what they call a locker ransomware, and that term has been used in the regular world as well. But the locker ransomware is, in this case, is a lock screen. You won't be allowed to get in unless you pay the ransom. Then there's the standard crypto. We're encrypting all your files and you're not going to get them back unless you pay the ransom. And then the third kind of big bucket, which is sort of related but different and a little bit black. Troy's way too young for this, but I remember back in the day when the worms would start floating around on traditional endpoints. And the whole thing about a worm was it was self-replicating, and that was a big fancy word for, if I got onto Troy's computer, I actually got into all Troy's contacts and emails, and I just started sending it out to everybody. And so then I got into their emails and replicate. This new form of mobile ransomware will actually take your contacts and will threaten to attack all of your contacts unless you pay. So there's all this new ransomware that's starting to come out that we really do need to deal with. Now, shifting gears, if I could, Troy, thank you. Talked about phishing. Just have a couple of slides on phishing. This data was in 2021. We saw that 75% of the phishing sites were literally designed and optimized for mobile. Again, sneak peek, that's now over 80% from 2022. What does this mean? Well, it means that they're literally setting themselves up to deliver differently and or only deliver if you're on mobile. So a lot of traditional corporate anti-phishing solutions, which by the way are inline in corporate email. Troy was even talking about, phishing emails. And one of the things I always like to ask people is legitimately, when was the last time you remember getting a phishing email? And then when was the last time you remember getting a phishing text? I get phishing text every day. It's amazing how many times Netflix has closed my account, right? And it's amazing how many times I need to reset my password for PayPal, even though I haven't used PayPal in 15 years, right? But still, it's there. So there's all these vectors on mobile that aren't even available to be protected by traditional anti-phishing solutions. That's why guys like GigOhm talk about us. Well, part of the reason why these sites are being optimized for mobile is it's such an easy platform. You can't compare the URL easily. You just like all the stuff we're used to on a traditional side. And by setting it up where, for instance, the site will only render if it's on a mobile, then they're actually helping hide from the corporate anti-phishing solutions that are on traditional. So it makes a lot of sense. Huge spike. Everybody's seen it. We all know what's going on. So the next two slides are a comparison just for fun. So Troy, if you wouldn't mind. This is the data from the most phished brands in North America that were in 2021. I think the thing that's most interesting on this for me personally is the number one player on the board. If for enterprise folks that are saying, well, we don't really have to worry about phishing because it's just a consumer game and blah, blah, blah. Well, again, get back to the user. The user does use their same user ID, their same password, everywhere they go. So if they get phished on eBay, the first thing they're going to do is use that email with the corporate email to see if it works, right? They will. But the second part is Microsoft. Because of the pandemic, everybody started rushing out, doing computing on everything. Everybody checks their email on their mobile devices. So Microsoft being phished is a direct assault at the enterprise. It's not even an indirect one. So this is 2021. And again, sneak peek for all the folks that are here that are getting ahead of our global mobile threat report, which is a mouthful, right? If we go to the next year, Troy, here's 2022. Notice Microsoft still representing strong, but all of a sudden the USPS has taken over the number one position in North America. The reason I mention that is you need something that's continuing to evolve. Signatures in phishing are as useless as signatures are in malware. You need to be able to have machine learning detection of what is happening now and what is threatening, what's going on. We see these same sort of trends all the time. Well, we see a spike in PayPal in Asia Pacific, for instance, and then it'll go away. There are campaigns that are going away. You need to be able to have a detection technology that evolves to keep detecting these things. So as we start bringing this home a little bit, next slide, please. I mentioned network attacks. The dumbest thing about smartphones is the phone introduces itself to the network, not the other way around. So your phone just cruises around and just kind of goes through its list of any Wi-Fi it's ever connected to, and it's literally like, hey, what's up? Are you Starbucks? And all the network has to do is go, yes, and your phone connects. It's literally that easy. So in 21, we detected 2 million unique man-in-the-middle and rogue access points. And the rogue access points are those fake Wi-Fis that I was talking about. So that's a gift that keeps giving. Phishing is huge. Networks are a big issue. Spyware, ransomware, big issue, all ultimately leading to exploits, device compromises, et cetera. And when that happens, what happens? You lose credentials. You lose credentials, they get access to the data. That's when breaches happen. That's exactly what happened with Twilio. It's exactly what happened with Activision. that Troy was just talking about. So that's why this stuff matters, right? So to kind of bring this home, our whole plan here, go to the next slide, please, Troy. Our whole plan here was not to hit you guys over the head with a bunch of product information. I'm going to explain our product briefly, and I'm going to explain why it, is the best in the industry. But this was more to say, hey, look, both Underwear and Zimperium said, let's educate. We see this stuff all the time. It's not something that people, if you're not steeped in it, you might not have the same kind of framework. And so we wanted to kind of explain what is at risk, what is it at risk against, or at risk from, and then, oh, by the way, how do we go ahead and fix it? So here's a quote from Tom, also from our threat report, that just kind of puts a fine point on this side of things. So briefly, Troy, if we can go forward, please. What's the solution, right? Well, I mentioned mobile threat defense. There's different approaches to mobile threat defense, but basically think of it as mobile EDR, mobile EPP, whatever you want to call it, plus the advanced app analysis. Okay, so all these things we've been talking about, device network phishing, app attacks, you need to be able to have the ability to detect those, both known and unknown, to be able to provide protection. Every once in a while you hear about these, like we all get just stunned by marketing words, right? And we just sit there and it's like, hey, by the way, I'm proud. I did not use XDR or Zero Trust so far in this conversation until just now when I just blew my record. So I try to avoid buzzwords, all the time. One of the words that's on this slide might look like a buzzword, but it's very important to understand that it isn't. And that is the hyphenated on-device term. Zimperium is hugely differentiated, and part of the reason why Gartner, here's that quote that you guys can read, I don't need to self-gloss. Why are we the most enterprise ready, and why do we win 90+% of the opportunities to protect customers, right? It's largely because of that on-device. We took an architectural approach where we do all of our detection on device. Most of the industry took an approach where they said, we're going to go to the cloud. Why does that matter, right? Well, when the bad guy owns a network, like I was just talking about a few minutes ago, which is so easy. If I'm targeting, the Royal Bank or something, if I put a fake Wi-Fi up in the coffee shop across from the headquarters, somebody comes in, they check their fantasy football score or whatever, and they get their latte, and then I compromise their device and they walk right in, right? If the bad guy owns the network, the first thing he does is cut off access to cloud-based detection. It doesn't make any sense for him to actually let you go to something that's going to detect him. So we can defend ourselves when we're on device. Nobody else can. They're basically blind. Second major benefit. The cloud folks had to pick a cloud provider to put their management console in. They're all AWS, which is awesome. We work on AWS too. We're the only ones who can also work natively on Azure, natively on Google, natively on Oracle, which is why we're endorsed by all those guys. By the way, if you're in a federal organization, for instance, we're the only ones that can operate our management console on-prem. Why? Because we're doing our detection on device. And then finally, privacy. We don't have to take any data off the device if you don't want to. So if you've got different user groups, maybe you've got the corporate-owned devices and it's hardcore, and I need to know exactly what's going on, every piece of forensic data you could possibly get coming off. Maybe you have a BYOD implementation and you need to explain to the users, no, we're not taking any of your personal information, we're good, just leave that off. So that's why across iOS, Android, and Chromebooks, we are the privacy first option, but we don't give up on the protection capability. We don't believe in that, right? So that's very important. The advanced app analysis, I mentioned that 90% of the apps that are on these endpoints are not corporate sanctioned, right? Like TikTok, which we're going to talk about in the next slide, right? Maybe we can even move over there if we want and talk about TikTok just because it's a pretty slide, right? On those 90, in this case right now, TikTok, just happens to be everywhere. Troy mentioned government's banning it. Canada's banned it. The United States banned it. 28 states in the United States have banned it, right? Et cetera. And I mentioned part of why. Troy mentioned part of why, right? The fact is, there's a lot more TikTok-like solutions out there doing things on these devices that, as security practitioners, you need to know about. So Zips, our solution, not only will detect malicious apps, like I mentioned, it will also say, based on your policies, if you say, look, I don't want any apps, if you're accessing my corporate data, I don't want any apps that are sending traffic to a foreign country, or I don't want any apps that are doing something else. So it's not just the individual app itself, it's what is the behavior that I'm trying to ban. So you can either ban the app or you can ban a behavior regardless of whether or not an app has it. The reality is most of these apps, they're Legos. I mean, that's all they are. When developers are going to develop mobile apps, they don't write any new code for the most part. What they do is they say, oh, I need access to contacts, and they'll go get a library and SDK on the internet, pop the Lego in, right? Or I need this. A lot of times they don't even know what these Legos are doing, right? In TikTok's case, they knew what they're doing because they're based out of China, but there's a lot of other ones that they don't even know, but you need to protect yourself from it, right? So we kind of rolled down, we're going to wrap up here. We rolled down through all this and we talked about the threats. We talked about the difference between MTD and MDM and why you need an MTD solution to actively detect these types of threats. We talked about our solution briefly and why we're the worldwide leader, and there's a whole bunch of other reasons. And we are, more than happy to set up demos and conversations with you guys, because that's obviously we all work together, right? Talked about some of the risks in apps like TikTok and how you actually need to deal with these on a policy type basis. And then the last thing I'm going to kind of hit on just briefly, if you wouldn't mind, Troy, on the next slide, is let's not forget compliance mandates. I always kind of joke about the fact that the only hacker you're going to face is an auditor. So you might like say, well, why would an attacker go after me or whatever? If you have to deal with some of these mandates, just happen to be talking about PCI here, and I don't know, do you guys pronounce it FIPA? Is that the way you pronounce it, or PHIPA? Whatever the case may be, it's the equivalent of our HIPAA, and I've actually spent a lot of time looking at this over the last few weeks. If you look at these mandates, they all say the same thing. They all say, look, if you're processing cardholder data or if you're handling patient information, you must, on any of these endpoints, you must implement an anti-malware solution. You must prevent malware from impacting. You must patch systems as soon as available to prevent exploits. So there's these security steps, and it's same in PCI as it is in PHIPA, as it is in HIPAA, as it is in NERC, as it is in, they all cut and paste from each other. But they're going to come and they're going to check, and if there's patient data sitting on a tablet, it's no different than if there's patient data sitting on a laptop. So if you have to meet any of these compliance mandates and you are using that 10% of applications to access the same data, you're held to the same standard. So that's just something else to kind of hit on. So with that, I will wrap it up. Troy, thanks for having me here, and I will pass it back over to you.
Yep. Thank you, JT. So we will go ahead and take some time for questions. Please be sure to type them into the question box in your control panel. Right now we have two. So what are the chances of false positives or false negatives?
Great question. It's our false positive and false negative rates are infinitesimal at this point in time. When I first joined Zimperium, one of the first things I did, this is 6 years ago, is I nerded out by pulling out our patent filing. We have multiple patents on how to solve this. And it was all talk about machine learning, and it was how we were testing our solution against all of the best standard tests in in machine learning, next neighbor and random forest and all these different techniques. The thing I thought was interesting as I sat there reading this, honestly, with a glass of wine, because I was trying to figure it out, right? The thing that caught my attention was it said we ran the test and it was Zimperium against all these tests. And it said, and our detection was no better than any of the tests. And I was like, okay, that's not exactly what I was looking for. And then it said, until we denoised, until we figured out what not to look for, what to ignore, depending on what it was that we were looking at. And then our effectiveness went up to 99.5%, and it's been higher than that even since. So it's a great question. We don't experience it much at all now. Now, if there is one place that we've had to deal with it a little bit is on the network side. There are some things that can actually be legitimate, let's say network scans, and so we've had to address it there. But as a general rule, over the last 3 or 4 years, it hasn't come up at all. Great question, though. Thank you.
Thanks for that, JD. Another one is, can your solution integrate with their existing MDM solution?
Absolutely. Fantastic question. Matter of fact, one of the reasons that Gartner says that we are the enterprise choice is we integrate with more MDMs than anybody else. And even more importantly, or as importantly maybe, we're the only ones that really have a compelling solution for operating with multiple MDMs. A lot of times what we'll see is maybe they're on one MDM, but they're moving to another. Or a couple companies, maybe they acquire a company and there's 2 MDMs. We can actually operate perfectly well on top of both of them. So all the major ones, Intune, MobileIron, VMware, BlackBerry, SOTI, all of them we integrate with. The one thing I will point out too is that Avanti, which is the old MobileIron, our technology is actually inside the MobileIron MDM agent. So if people are already Avanti customers, all you have to do is flip a switch and you have 100% protection with MTD technology across the board. So again, another great question. Appreciate it.
I think we have the last one. Will there be requiring any changes to their existing mobile device configuration?
No. We operate in all the different device configurations, whether it's supervised mode or all the way down, like I said, to BYOD. Matter of fact, we also go all the way down to, we have a corporate social responsibility initiative that we've been doing for a number of years now, where because we do all our detection on device, and I said we don't have to take any data off the device, we've actually worked with cities and states, so far only in the United States, to actually protect their citizens with a branded version. So we've got NYC Secure in New York, we've got Michigan Secure, LA Secure, Dallas Secure. This is where it's literally providing the same protection that we use to protect the Department of Defense or JP Morgan Chase, but on device without any data leaving the device. And especially in the consumer market, it doesn't require any changes in the device configurations. So good questions. I like the questions.
All right, I think that's everything for now. Before we wrap up, Troy, can you please hit next? If you're interested in learning more of how Zimperium works, I wanted to let everyone know that Interware is offering a limited time offer 30-minute demo with Interware's network security architect to guide you through how this amazing mobile threat defense solution works for your organization. And on top of that, attendees will each have a copy of the 2022 Global Mobile Threat Report from our friends Zimperium, which is the year review of mobile threat data and even a sneak peek of the 2023 report to, stay ahead of the latest mobile threats and trends and improve overall mobile security. I will be sending you all a recording of this presentation and as well as the demo to sign up, so you could save your consultation spot as soon as possible. And that's a wrap. I thank you for everyone for joining us, and we hope you found this session helpful and meaningful that you can put to work today. Thank you so much, JT and Troy, and have a great day, everyone.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.